Hello everybody, welcome to Sane Game Studios. I'm Sane, I'm an amateur game developer. Today on Gamemaker tutorials, I'm going to be taking a look at the engine from the perspective of the beginner and just kind of going through what the basic layout of the engine is and what the basic things a beginner is going to be interacting with. So when you start a new project, you're going to be greeted with a screen that looks like this. You're not going to have much, you're just going to have a workspace and a room. So like pretty much every application that exists on the face of the earth, up here you're going to have a little bit of a bar that's going to give you some tools. For the most part, these aren't going to be used for actually creating your game, although there are a few things up here that are good to keep in mind. Here underneath tools, we have audio groups, which is something that I'm going to be using quite a bit in any project that I make, and it is a way that we can group sounds and like music and stuff into groups, and then we can alter all of the sounds in that group together. It's really handy for that. But below this, you're going to have this bar here, and this has a few handy things. It's got your save functions. Over here is your debug, play, stop, and cleanup. You got your game options, which when you click on this is going to give you all the options for your game. And the most important one you're going to want to be paying attention to off the hop is your game frames per second. And then here's just some zoom controls for the workspace. And if you click on this, it's going to collapse all the other windows like your sidebars, and it's going to make the workspace bigger. So the workspace itself is what it sounds like. It's a workspace. It's where everything that you are working on is going to go so that you can just actively work on it. This is where you're going to do your coding. It's where you're going to do your sprite editing. Pretty much everything that you're going to be working on for your game, like asset wise, you're going to be doing it inside of this workspace. Over here is the inspector, and it's going to give you some information about anything that it is you currently have selected. This is not something that I use a whole lot. It's something that more comes into use when you're dealing with the room editor, because it's got important things like camera settings and viewport settings and all your layer information, how to add new layers and structure your layers and stuff like this. This is really important in the room editor. It's not something that I'm going to use a whole lot while in the workspace. So while in the workspace, I'm probably just going to minimize that. So one of the most important things you're going to have in Gamemaker, you're going to be using it constantly, is over on this side. It is the asset browser. So everything that you make for your game is going to be stored here, whether it is a sprite, whether it's a sound, an object, a font. Anything that you are going to create and use inside of your game is going to be stored here in the asset browser, and this is going to balloon in size. As you create games, just the amount of things you're going to need for your game is going to just be massive. So one of the most important things you're going to want to do is keep your asset browser organized. And there is a couple easy ways to do this. Gamemaker does start off by giving you a handful of groups that you can use to organize your game. At any point in time, you can just delete any of these groups. You could right click and go create a group, and it will just pop a group in there. You can rename it anything you want, and you can organize your game any way that you want. So when you're adding something to the asset browser, there's a couple ways you can do it. The first thing you can do is you can just right click anywhere, go assets, and be like create object. And it's going to create an object, and it's going to put it at the bottom of your asset browser. A better way to do it is you can right click on the asset browser, what group or folder you want that asset to be in, and then you can create it, and then it will automatically put it inside of that folder. It's just a much quicker, easier way to keep the asset browser organized, and you're going to want to keep this organized. If you start getting lost in your asset browser, you're going to have a bad time. It just becomes miserable to just continue to maintain your project. So one of the best things you can do for like your own sanity is keep everything inside the asset browser nicely organized from the beginning. As you can see, Gamemaker is going to start you off with a single room, and That's because a Gamemaker project needs at least one room in order to be able to run. At any point in time, you can just hit play and your game will run as long as you have a room. Here's my room. Nothing fancy. There's nothing in it. It's just an empty box. Some of the more common things you're going to be dealing with when it comes to building assets is obviously going to be sprites. I'm just going to touch base a little bit on sprites and objects, and that's going to be it. But if you create a sprite, you're going to be met up with this screen where you can name the sprite, you can set the size of the sprite. If you change the width or the height, if I change the width, the height is going to change to match it while I have maintain aspect ratio ticked. Right, so if I change this to like 32, it changes to 32 by 32. But if I untick this, I can change the width to 64. And now it's 64 by 32. It is good to create a blank sprite. Like if you're going to be creating your sprites inside a Gamemaker, which is nothing wrong with the built-in Gamemaker Sprite Editor, is pretty good, but you're going to want to create your sprite at the size that you want your final sprite to be. Don't like create a large sprite. Like if I'm creating like a 32 by 32 sprite, I'm not going to draw it on a 100 by 100 canvas. I'm going to create a 32 by 32 canvas and I'm going to draw it on there. So to enter the Sprite Editor, I'm just going to click on Edit Image and it's going to pull up this. This is your sprite editor. You can use it to just draw. There's a handful of tools over here, like you got your paint bucket tool. You have your line tool. You have this one that creates squares. This one that creates circles, so on and so forth. If you don't find the exact color that you need here, you can go ahead and just click on the color here and it brings up the color editor. If you need to make an animation up here, you can just add new frames. When you draw something, let's say I draw a circle, and I want that circle to exist in my next frame because I'm just going to be doing a small edit to it to create the animation. You can just go up here, right click, duplicate frames. Then you'll have 2 frames that have that sprite on it there. If you open up the inspector while you're in here, you can change your frames per second, which will affect how quickly the animation plays. Alright, so if I hit play, change that to like a 7, and it's going to slow down significantly. Change it to a 5, it'll slow down even more. Change it to a 60, and it's going to go buck wild. You can delete frames, you can copy frames, and then you can paste them. I believe that you can even paste them into new sprites. If you do need to just copy a chunk of a sprite, you can just highlight it, Control C, and it'll pop up down here under your brushes. You can have up to 5 copied chunks of sprite at any given time. Really handy, I use that quite a bit. I actually don't make much of my own art. I do make some. One thing that I've noticed though when using asset packs is that no matter how good or thorough an asset pack is, there's going to be animations that you want for your specific project that is not included inside of the asset pack, and you're going to have to create them by editing, and that's absolutely fine. I've never seen an asset pack that says you aren't allowed to edit it. You just simply can't say it's your own. The next most common thing that I want to talk about while we're in here is objects. I'm not going to go super into objects because I have a video that is being released at the same time as this that does do a deep dive into objects and what they are. But objects are essentially your everything. They are what give animation to sprites inside the game. They are what can give you control of them. You create your enemies with objects. Your player character is going to be an object. Anything you interact with inside the world is going to be an object. And objects are also where you do all of your coding. So you're going to put all of your code inside of objects. Well, like 99.9% of your code is going to go inside of objects. The final thing that I want to talk about before we move on is going to be the room editor. So, like I said, it's just like a quick introduction into Gamemaker and what it is. So if I enter the room editor, you're going to see a screen that looks like this. Okay, so what is a room? You can think of a room as a level. And rooms can do a lot of things. You can have a room that's going to be like your intro screen that's going to show like any, like whatever you decide to call yourself as a studio. You can just have that list appear in a room and then transition to another room that's going to be like your main menu. But then your entire game is going to be built of rooms. When your player enters the game, each room is going to represent like an area of game world that you can craft for the player to interact inside of. You get you get access to your asset browser while in the room, and then while you are in the room, you are able to just drag and drop assets from your asset browser into the room. One thing that's important though is certain assets can only go onto certain layers. Like objects can only go onto instances layers. The background layer is reserved for solid colors or for sprites. And then you can use those to create a background for your game. One thing that I like to do is no matter how detailed my background gets, no matter how much of the space inside my background that I fill, I'm always going to have a background layer that is just a solid color that's going to sit behind everything. And actually, I'll show you why real quick. So I'm going to create an image, and I'm going to do yellow, purple, and then yellow again. And then I'm going to go to my object. I'm going to assign it that sprite. I'm going to go to its step event. And I'm just going to say X++. Then I'm going to go into my room. I'm going to add this object. I'm going to leave the background visible, and I'm going to run this. And you're just going to see it move towards the right of the screen. But if I get rid of my background layer, so what's happening here is that as the sprite gets drawn, as it moves across the screen, Gamemaker has nothing else to draw to replace it. That's why you need the background, because when the sprite moves and the space that the sprite used to inhabit is now empty, Gamemaker needs to draw over that sprite so that it is no longer being drawn to the screen. And to do that, you're going to have to give it something to draw over its previous location. And backgrounds do that. So if I turn my background back on, and that is why I'm always going to have just like a solid color background behind all of my background elements. Because if by the off chance for any reason the player reaches a point where they are not in front of a background, I do not want the sprite to just be drawn in a trail like that. And then when it comes to depth sorting, so when you're thinking about things in front of other things, unless you are manipulating the depth position of an instance based on code, then it is going to be layered based on your layers. So if I create a second background layer here, I'm going to put it right here. So we have background and background 1. And I'm going to change this one to be red. As you can see, red pops up. But then this background's black or like dark gray. If I move it above the red one disappears. And that is because of the way that Gamemaker does its layers and the depth sorting of layers. But like the great thing about the room editor is essentially you just create the layers that you need, and then you can go to your asset browser and you can just use your assets to paint onto the room everything that you want for that level inside of your game. There are also ways that you can do this with like procedural generation, and you can create instances with codes. Like if you want an instance to exist, like an enemy to exist inside of the room, but you want it to spawn rather than be placed, you just have to create that instance with code. And then when you create an instance with code, Gamemaker is going to ask you what layer you want to create it with. Because the most important thing that Gamemaker is going to need to know when they're creating any kind of asset with code inside of your game, is it's going to need to know the depth of that object. So there's two ways to create instances. There's instance create layer and instance create depth, and they both do the same thing for Gamemaker. They tell it how deep it is, so it knows what to draw on top of it, what to draw behind it, which is all really important information for Gamemaker. But if I go to create a layer, there's background, instance, tile, path, asset, effects, and UI. So what are these? So I've already covered the background and the instances layer. The tile layer is really handy. You can create tile sets inside of your asset browser here. Use tile sets, and then you can assign a tile set to a tile. Well, assign the tile layer a tile set, and then you can use it to just paint, right? So you're going to get a tiles over here where the asset browser is, and then you can select a tile and you just click, drag, and paint. You can use the path layer to manually create paths for your instances to follow. The asset layer is just where you can put like text and sprites and stuff like this. There's an effects layer, which are pretty much just they're built-in visual effects. They're just built-in shaders is what they are, and you can do some really cool things with them. There's also the UI layer. The UI layer is rather new, and they're still ironing it out. It was a great attempt by Gamemaker and Yo-Yo Games to include a much desired feature. It falls short of what we expect for like peak functionality. So I personally recommend creating your UI the old-fashioned way with code. But if you want to pull your hair out and figure out how to use UI layers, you can absolutely do that. There's Gamemaker official tutorials on how to use the UI layers on YouTube, and you can drive yourself mad trying to figure these out. So another really important thing that the room's going to have for the inspector is it's going to have room settings where you can affect the width and the height of the room, and it always generates itself from the top left corner and then creates itself width and then height. So when I'm building a room, normally what I do is I'm going to set my room size to be much larger than what I want. For the most part, there are certainly exceptions. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my room starting in this corner. And then once I have it built, I'm going to adjust my room settings again to reflect that. So here I can show you what I mean. So let's say I go to my instances layer, and Oh, I got rid of that. So I'm going to go to my assets layer, and I'm going to place this sprite here. But I now have dead space underneath of the sprite and to the right of the sprite. So I'll get the coordinate of the bottom corner of the sprite, which is going to appear on the bottom screen, like down here. And let's say 864 and 514. So if I go here, I can go 864, 514. And it trims the room. But it's going to keep everything that you have still within the room exactly where it was. There's also viewports and cameras where you can enable viewports. And this will create a camera for inside of your game. And then you can use viewports and camera properties and viewport properties to adjust like the scale of your game. You can use it to have the game zoom in on the room, zoom out on the room. You can also use it to set your aspect ratio to be exactly what you want, because without viewports or cameras, when you play the game, Gamemaker is going to open a window the size of whatever room it's opening the window to. Whereas if you use a viewport, it's going to create a window the size of your viewport, and then it is going to use a camera system, and then you can use code to manipulate that camera system and move it around. If you want to learn more about cameras or viewports and resolution, those are all videos that I have on my channel. You can go ahead and take a look at those. After viewport and cameras, they have physics, where you can affect your gravity and all this, and you take enable physics if you want physics to be active inside of this room. Physics are not something that I've ever played with in Gamemaker. When I'm making my 2D pixel art games, I don't really want realistic physics. I just I want to fall uniformly and like stuff like that, and I just do that with code rather than using physics. But yeah, so there's a brief just crash course on rooms, a brief crash course on what the workspace is, what the asset browser is, what the inspector is. Down here, there's also errors. Well, this is not errors. This is your console. So anytime that you run the program, actually I can show you here. If I click run, it's going to compile your project and then open it. And then if you have any kind of errors, they're going to show up in here. So let's create an object and let's give it an error. So let's just say I write a whole bunch of bad code. And then I'm going to take that object and I'm going to put it inside of my room, and it has bad code inside of it. I'm going to make sure I have my console open, and I'm going to run this. So it's going to automatically open up compile errors, and it says object 1 event create add line 2 assignment operator expected. So then if I go to my object, I'm going to go to the create event. It thinks the word bad is a variable, and it doesn't know what code is. And what it expects is for an equal sign, and then for it to equal a valid value. So that right there, that would get rid of my error code. I'd be taking a string called code and storing it in the variable bad. But if you make an error in your code, Gamemaker will usually let you know right in here. Then if you try to compile it, it will give you a list of any and all errors that stopped it from being able to compile. And then if you go to your output, right here it says failed run program complete. It means it failed to run the program. And then if I scroll up, right here is that same error. So if you are playing your game and it crashes because of an error, so like you didn't have, bad code necessarily, but your code left something open-ended, or you tried to read a variable that you hadn't assigned properly, or your order of operations was faulty and the game didn't know what to do, it's going to crash, and you can find error codes in here. You can also search your entire project. So you can press Control-Shift-F on Windows, and you can open up the search and replace window where you can search, and when you search, you're going to find all of your search results in here. And then there's also feather messages. Feather is something that's built in to try to protect you from bad habits, essentially. So like if I were to not have anything in my create event, and I were to go to my step event, and I were to write bad equals 0, so yeah, I think I have feather turned off, but it would have given me a feather message saying, a variable declared outside of create event, and it would have asked me to move that variable to the create event. But yeah, that's essentially all I wanted to do in this video, was just give like a quick crash course on what it is you're going to need to know when you first open Gamemaker, and then everything else that Gamemaker has to offer, which is a lot. There's a lot to this game engine. It is best learned as you need it. But when you first enter Gamemaker, you're going to need to know what the workspace is, what the inspector is, what the console is, what the asset browser is, what sprites are, what objects are, what rooms are, what layers are. And that was the point of this video, is to just give you enough information to start working with this game engine and then get lost and break something so that you can figure out how to fix things. And that is how you learn how to build games. So that's all that I have for this video. I'm going to thank you guys very much for watching. If you have any questions, or if you need more tutorials, you can go ahead and either comment down below, or you can check out my channel. For questions, comment down below. For more tutorials, check out my channel. I have quite a few tutorials on there. I'm still making more. If there is a tutorial that you want that I don't have a video for, you can go ahead and request it. I have a couple posts on my community page that ask for tutorial requests. So if you have a suggestion for a tutorial, you can comment on those, or you can comment on any of my videos and ask for a tutorial, and I will absolutely make one for you. But yeah, that's all that I got. So with that, I'm going to wish you guys a good one. I hope you're having a great day. I'm just going to throw out the usual YouTuber jargon of please like, comment, and subscribe. I know it's annoying, but it really helps us out. And peace out.